Okay, let's unpack this. You've brought us a really interesting source today.
Yeah, it's an audio report. Describes a moment of, well, extremely high tension on the Korean peninsula.
Right, and our mission here for this deep dive is
Right.
to really get inside this report.
Exactly. Pull out the key details, understand what it was claiming happened, what evidence it gave.
And its interpretation of why things were supposedly so tense.
Uh-huh.
And it kicks off with a pretty dramatic central claim, doesn't it? About Kim Jong-un.
It does. Describes him as being up against a wall, facing a grim situation is the wording.
Grim, okay. And the core evidence the source uses for that is China and military movements.
That's right. Primarily reported actions by China and then, yes, significant military deployments in the region.
Okay, so let's start right there. China. What did this source actually report?
Well, it cites the Wall Street Journal, and the main point is that Air China, China's big airline,
Yeah.
temporarily suspended its flights between Beijing and Pyongyang.
Huh. Air China. That feels potentially significant, especially given the timing the source mentions.
Absolutely. So the report we're looking at says the notice went out on a Friday,
Okay.
and the flights weren't expected to resume until after the end of May. That specific time frame for this source is presented as, noteworthy.
And we should probably mention, as the report does, these aren't like sporadic flights. They started way back in 2008.
Right, usually 3 times a week. Yeah, cancellations have happened before, sure, for different reasons.
But the context here, according to this source, is what makes this suspension stand out.
Precisely. And Air China, it's the only Chinese airline flying direct. I mean, North Korea's own Air Koryo flies to a few Chinese cities.
Like Beijing, Shanghai.
Shenyang, Dandong, yeah. But this specific Air China move, the report really highlights it, frames it as telling.
And this is where the source's own analysis comes in, right? The difference between the official reason and the source's interpretation.
Exactly. So what did Reuters reportedly say Air China's reason was?
The report mentions Reuters passed on the official line, lack of ticket sales.
Right, lack of sales. And that flights would eventually start up again later, unspecified date.
Which our source pretty much immediately dismisses, calls it a cover story.
Yeah, dismisses it quickly. The analysis in this report just flat out states that Air China says whatever the Chinese government, wants them to say.
Okay, so if it's not ticket sales, from this source's perspective, what was the real message China was sending? Why suspend the flights?
The report's interpretation is that China is just very weary of North Korea's activities. It kind of speculates maybe China was genuinely scared that that Trump is going to finally put Kim in his place, is the phrase used, and maybe didn't want Chinese citizens in Pyongyang caught in the crossfire.
Or maybe feared fallout from something else.
Yeah, or maybe feared like a nuclear blast nearby or cruise missiles, something like that. The point is, according to this report, the very act of suspending those flights was China signaling it thought something serious could happen.
That framing the suspension as a signal, not just logistics, that seems like a key point from this report.
It is.
And it frames the signal as happening when tensions were, what, all-time high?
That's the phrase the source uses, yeah. All-time high.
So what indicators did the report point to? Why did it think tensions were that extreme?
Well, the analysis mentions several things it saw as, red flags. First, satellite data.
Right.
Reportedly indicating a potential nuclear event or maybe a test was about to take place.
No. Okay, a potential nuclear test. That would definitely ramp things up.
Hugely. And the report also brings up claims, unconfirmed, but claims that Pyongyang, or parts of it anyway, had been evacuated.
Evacuated.
And that journalists in the region were being told, be ready for a big event.
A big event. And this was all happening around the Day of the Sun anniversary, Kim Il-sung's birthday.
Exactly, which, historically, North Korea sometimes uses that date for big military displays or announcements.
All right, so for this source, you put all that together. The possible test, the evacuation reports, the big event warning, the anniversary. It paints a picture of a moment really on edge.
Yeah, contributing to that all-time high assessment within the report.
Okay, so you've got China reportedly sending a signal of concern. You've got these signs of potential imminent action from North Korea, according to the source. And all this is happening within a military landscape that the source describes as, well, pretty crowded.
Very crowded. The report gets specific about assets in the area.
Like what? What does it mention?
Okay, so the Stennis Strike Group, a U.S. Navy carrier group.
Where was it?
positioned about 300 miles away, according to this analysis, and it's described quite vividly in the report, able to take out anything that moves.
Strong words.
Yeah, with its 3 destroyers, and specifically noted as, quote, waiting for orders.
Waiting for orders. So a major naval force presented as nearby and ready. What about troops on the ground?
The report mentions significant Chinese troop numbers. It cites 150,000 troops at the northern border with North Korea, and then another 300,000 troops described as sitting ready to strike.
Ready to strike. Wow. Where did it say those troops came from?
The report connects that latter figure, the 300,000, to the recently concluded Operation Full Eagle exercise.
Okay. Operation Full Eagle. That was the big U.S.-South Korea drill.
Yes, it had just finished up.
Yeah.
Involved 30,000 U.S. troops alongside South Korean forces.
Got it. Any other military hardware mentioned?
Yep. B-52 bombers stationed in Guam. The report specifically highlights them as being ready to go ahead and launch at a moment's notice.
So the source paints this picture of like air power, naval power, significant ground forces,
Right.
all sort of converging or positioned
And
strategically.
in multiple countries, yeah. And it adds one more specific layer to that picture.
Which is?
It reports that SEAL Team 6, yes, Navy Special Forces,
Right.
were actually on the ground in South Korea at the time this report was made.
SEAL Team 6 on the ground. Okay, that definitely suggests a certain kind of readiness or potential kind of operation.
It implies that, yes.
So given this whole military buildup described in the source, it then goes on to talk about potential options, right, for dealing with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, if he were to, continue the nuclear program or actually detonate another device, the report lays out what it calls options that have been put out on the table.
And it names some very specific, very high-stakes options.
It does. It details the possibility of a complete decapitation of the North Korean leadership.
Decapitation.
Meaning taking out the top leadership. And the report explicitly links this option to the presence of SEAL Team 6, describes them as being, quote, poised to pull off an operation such as that.
Wow, a targeted strike on leadership. That's quite an option to have reportedly on the table.
Presented as one possibility, yes. And the report also mentions potential action by the Stennis strike group as another.
So using the carrier group.
Uh-huh. But it frames these very stark ideas as, just one option there, or simply options on the table that were being discussed, according to the source.
Okay, so let's try and summarize the picture this one particular report paints. You've got a reported unusual action by China, the flight suspension, which the source interprets as a major signal of concern.
Right.
That's happening alongside what the source sees as signs of extreme tension, potential nuclear activity, evacuations, warnings of a big event.
Uh-huh. All pointing towards something potentially imminent from North Korea.
And surrounding all this, you have a massive military buildup described. The carrier group, huge numbers of Chinese troops, U.S. troops from exercises, bombers on standby, even SEAL Team 6 reportedly on the ground.
Yeah, a very heavy military presence described.
And finally, the report mentions specific high-level potential response options being discussed, including leadership decapitation or naval action.
Exactly. So analyzing a source like this, it really helps you understand a specific perspective, a specific narrative that was circulating at a critical moment.
Right. It pulls together these reported actions, these interpretations, these potential scenarios into one, albeit quite dramatic, storyline.
It gives you a frame of reference, for the kind of intense analysis and, frankly, speculation that was reportedly going on at that time. It's one snapshot.
Absolutely. A snapshot of reported events and potential implications, all seen through one distinct lens, which leaves you, the listener, with this thought to consider, based purely on what this report claimed. If you accept the report's premise about the intensity of the military presence and the stark nature of the options being discussed, how significant then was China's reported decision to suspend those flights? How much weight did that carry as a potential signal of a shift or danger from the perspective presented in this source?